On the most crowded subway in Seoul, 3 seats sit empty, because the man beside them has put 6 people in the ground this year alone. She doesn't know that. She just knows her feet hurt. This is the story of the woman who sat next to the devil and made him forget he was one. If this story grabs you from the first scene, hit like. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go. The train smelled like sweat and cheap convenience store ramen, and the particular exhaustion that only exists on a Friday evening when the week has wrung every drop of usefulness out of a human body and still hasn't let go. Line 2, southbound, 9:47 p.m. Every horizontal surface occupied, every vertical handle gripped, every square inch of floor between the sliding doors and the seats claimed by someone's bag, someone's briefcase, someone's rain-damp umbrella leaking cold water onto someone else's shoes. Every inch except 3. 3 seats in the middle of car 6 sat empty like a gap in a mouth where teeth had been knocked out. The passengers on either side of those seats pressed themselves inward, toward the walls, toward the strangers next to them, toward anywhere that wasn't near the man sitting at the center of that empty space. They didn't look at him. That was the first rule. You didn't look. You shifted your gaze to your phone, to the advertisement panel above the windows, to the floor, to your own hands. Anywhere that meant you didn't have to acknowledge that Kang Ji-tae was sitting 4 feet away from you on a public train like a man who had every right to exist in ordinary spaces. He did have that right. Nobody was going to tell him otherwise. Ji-tae sat with his back straight and his knees apart, and his hands resting loosely on his thighs, the same way he sat everywhere. A posture that wasn't aggressive, wasn't performative, was simply the posture of a man who had stopped apologizing for the space he occupied somewhere around age 22. He was 34 now. He wore a dark charcoal coat that had cost more than most of the salaries in this train car combined, and his hair was cut close on the sides and pushed back from his forehead, and there was a thin scar that ran from the outer corner of his left eye toward his ear, pale and old and barely visible unless the light caught it a certain way. The light kept catching it. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't doing anything, actually. He was just sitting there, watching the dark tunnel blur past the windows, and that stillness, that complete unhurried absence of self-consciousness, was probably more frightening than anything else about him. People who have nothing to prove don't fidget. Ji-tae had nothing to prove. The train rocked into Sundoram Station and the doors opened and more bodies pushed in, compressing the standing passengers further, and still nobody sat in those 3 seats. A middle-aged man in a delivery uniform glanced at the empty space, registered something, a name, a face, a half-heard story from someone who'd heard it from someone else, and kept moving until he found a place to grip a handle near the far door instead. Ji-tae noticed. He always noticed. He said nothing. He was thinking about a debt collection that had gone sideways in Mapogu 3 days ago. He was thinking about the call he'd had that morning with his second-in-command, Dai-ho, about the Busan faction pushing at the edges of their territory like they thought the boundary lines were suggestions rather than facts written in consequence. He was thinking about 17 different things that had nothing to do with the train he was sitting on, which was why he almost missed her. Almost. She came through the connecting door between car 5 and car 6, and the first thing Ji-tae registered was that she wasn't Korean. The second thing he registered was that she was moving with the particular aggressive purpose of someone who has been on their feet for an extremely long time and has developed a deep personal grievance against standing as a concept. She was wearing a navy work blazer over a white shirt that had given up being crisp somewhere around hour 9, and she had one of those work ID lanyards still around her neck that people forget to take off after a long shift, and there were headphones around her neck that she wasn't using. And there was a tote bag on her shoulder that was bulging with what looked like a laptop and approximately 4 external hard drives. She was scanning the car, looking for a seat. Her gaze found the 3 empty ones. She looked at them, then looked at the man sitting beside them, then looked at the seats again. And the calculation she ran in her head took approximately 1.3 seconds before she started moving toward them. Ji-tae watched this happen with the detached interest of a man observing something unusual in a controlled environment. He'd seen the calculation before. He'd watched it play out on hundreds of faces in spaces he occupied. The difference was that every other time the calculation had concluded with the person finding another option, or deciding they could stand after all, or suddenly remembering they needed to be in a completely different section of the car. This woman concluded differently. She slung the tote bag off her shoulder, dropped into the seat directly beside him, not one seat over, not two seats over, the one directly adjacent, exhaled a breath that sounded like a small building being demolished, and pulled out her phone. Jitai stared at the side of her face. She didn't look at him. She was scrolling through something on her phone, messages, it looked like, a string of messages that made her press her lips together in an expression that walked the line between frustration and exhaustion. She kicked her heels slightly against the floor, the way people do when they've been in dress shoes for 12 hours and their feet are sending increasingly urgent distress signals. He kept staring. She still didn't look at him. This was unusual. Jitai searched for the right word and settled on unprecedented, at least in his recent memory, and he had a very good memory. He looked away, looked back at the window, felt the train pick up speed through the tunnel and thought about the Busan faction again, and about the debt in Mapugu, and about the supply chain meeting he had scheduled for Monday morning that was going to require him to sit across from two men he genuinely disliked for approximately 4 hours. Beside him, the woman's head dropped slightly. He glanced sideways. Her eyes were closed. Her head drooped forward, snapped back up as she startled awake, dropped forward again. Her phone was still in her hand, screen still lit, a half-typed message sitting unfinished in a text window. Her grip on the phone loosened, tightened again. Loosened. Jitai watched this happen with an expression that hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted slightly into a territory that he didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't amusement exactly. It was something more complicated than that. Her head dropped toward his shoulder. He went completely still. Her head touched his shoulder and she made a small sound, barely audible over the train noise, and settled and was asleep. Kang Jitai, whose name alone was enough to empty 3 seats on a crowded subway, was currently being used as a pillow by a woman who apparently didn't know or didn't care who he was, and he sat there for 7 full minutes without moving. He didn't move because, and this was a thought he examined with some suspicion, the way you examine an unfamiliar object to determine if it's dangerous, he didn't want to wake her. She had the deep under-quality of someone who genuinely needed the sleep, and there was something about the unself-consciousness of it, the absolute absence of fear in it, that made disturbing it feel like a wrong move. Like breaking something that had no business being in front of him in the first place but was here anyway. So he sat there, and the train kept moving. She woke up at Hongdae Station when the recorded announcement came through the speakers at a volume that had no relationship to necessity or human comfort. Her head came up sharply, and he watched her process. The seat, the train, the unfamiliar shoulder her face had been pressed against, in about 2 seconds, and then she turned and looked at him directly for the first time. She had dark brown eyes and a face that was currently doing about 6 things at once: sleep-stunned, recognizing, recalibrating, landing on something. And then she said, oh no. Jitai said nothing. I fell asleep on you. She sat up straight and pulled her blazer back into order with the brisk efficiency of someone who is handling this and would prefer not to make it into a thing. I'm sorry. That was incredibly inappropriate. I fell asleep on a stranger on the subway. I'm so sorry. Jitai said, it's fine. She looked at him again, more carefully this time. He watched her do it. Watched her look at his face, his coat, the way he was sitting, and he could see the second when something clicked. Not full recognition, maybe, but enough. Something in the neighborhood of there's something different about this man. She said, are you sure? You look like someone who does not think it's fine. He said, I don't change my expression much. Okay, she said, and there was a beat, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not the polite social laugh. Not the nervous laugh people do when they're afraid of him and trying to mask it. An actual laugh, short and real and slightly exhausted. And she said, I just woke up and realized I used a stranger as a pillow, and your face is doing absolutely nothing, which honestly is a very appropriate response to that situation. So, Jitai looked at her. He said, you're not Korean. Observant, she said. Nigerian. Zurio Koye. I work in cybersecurity. I've been at the same server crisis since 9 this morning, and before you say anything about the falling asleep thing, my body made that decision unilaterally, and I was not consulted. I wasn't going to say anything about the falling asleep. Good. She picked up her phone from her lap. She'd somehow managed not to drop it, and locked the screen. Then she looked at him again. At his wrist, actually. At the bracelet. Jitai wore one bracelet always on his left wrist. It was a simple chain, matte black metal, with a single small charm that was shaped like, very distinctly, a pistol, about 3 centimeters long, detailed enough that it was clearly a pistol and not something you could mistake for something else. She said, "That's a really nice bracelet." He looked at his wrist, back at her. She said, "The little gun charm, it's very specific. I like it. It's bold." He said, "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly and the corner of her mouth pulled up and she said, "Are you like in law enforcement or something? Or do you just really like guns?" And Kang Ji-tae, who had not laughed in a way that reached his eyes in longer than he could precisely calculate, laughed. It was quiet, it was short, but it was real. She looked at him with an expression that suggested she had not expected that and found it more interesting for being unexpected. And then the train was pulling into her stop and she was standing up and grabbing her tote bag and saying, "Okay, Mr. No Expression Gun Charm, this is me. I'm sorry again about the shoulder." "It's fine," he said again. She looked at him for one more second. Just one. A clean, direct look that didn't flinch and didn't perform and didn't carry anything except genuine, ordinary human curiosity. And then she stepped through the doors, and the platform swallowed her. The doors closed. The train moved. Ji-tae looked at the empty seat beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because the 3 empty seats around him were still empty, and everything was exactly as it had always been. He thought about her for the rest of the ride home. He lived in a penthouse apartment in Gangnam that his subordinates referred to as the residence, and that Ji-tae privately thought of as the place where he slept. It had every surface that money could buy. Italian marble, a kitchen that had never once been used for cooking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city grid. And it was silent in a way that apartments with other people in them are not. Ji-tae had arranged his life carefully to minimize the variables he couldn't control. The residence was a controlled variable. Everything that came through its door came through because he had decided it would. He poured a measure of whiskey and stood at the windows and looked at Seoul laid out below him, and thought about a woman who had looked at a pistol charm on his bracelet and called it bold. Daeho called at midnight. Daeho was 31 and had been with Ji-tae for 9 years, since they were both operating at a much smaller scale in a much more dangerous and much less organized version of the world they now controlled. And he was the only person alive who called Ji-tae at midnight to discuss logistics without first sending a message to confirm this was acceptable. Ji-tae picked up. Daeho said, "Busan moved 2 of their collection points 3 blocks east, into Yeongdeungpo. How many?" 4 men. Choi spotted them this afternoon, didn't engage. "Good. Tell Choi he made the right call." Ji-tae turned away from the window. "Move our collection schedule from Wednesday to Tuesday in Yeongdeungpo this week. Just the schedule. Don't touch their people." That's subtle. It's a reminder that we've been here longer than they have, and we know the calendar. Daeho was quiet for a second. Then, "You sound different." Ji-tae said, "I sound the same. You sound like something happened." "Something is always happening. That's the nature of the business we're in." "Boss?" Daeho's voice had the careful quality of a man who has learned exactly which lines he can press on and which ones will close up like a scar. "I've known you for 9 years. You sound different tonight." "Handle the Yeongdeungpo situation," Ji-tae said, and ended the call. He stood in the silence of the residence for a while longer, the whiskey glass in his hand and the city below him and the ceiling above him, and he replayed, without consciously deciding to, the 2 seconds when she'd turned and looked at him after waking up on his shoulder, the absence of fear in it, the directness, the way she'd processed the situation and landed on, "I fell asleep on a stranger," rather than "I fell asleep on someone dangerous," as if his dangerousness was simply not the relevant category to file him under. He set down the whiskey glass. He would not think about her again, he decided. There was no version of this situation where thinking about her further was useful. She was a cybersecurity engineer who'd been running on no sleep and happened to sit next to him on a train. That was a random event. Random events were not things he devoted resources to. He thought about her again the next morning. Well, Ji-tae had resources that most people didn't have, and one of those resources was a man named Woo Jin, who was 26 and had the ability to find a person from 3 partial data points with a speed that bordered on the unsettling. Woo Jin worked in the technical division of Ji-tae's organization, which in practice meant that Woo Jin sat in a room full of monitors and found things. Jitai did not call Wu Jin. He made himself coffee in the kitchen that had never been used for cooking, and he read through the morning reports that Daiho had filed, and he had 3 separate calls about 3 separate matters that required his attention, and he did not call Wu Jin. By the afternoon, he called Wu Jin. "I need you to find someone," he said. "Her name is Zuri Okoye, Nigerian, works in cybersecurity in Seoul." There was the sound of keys, then Okoye. "First name Zuri. Is this boss? Is this personal? It's informational. There's a difference." "Of course," Wu Jin said, and his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who has decided this is not a conversation he needs to have an opinion about. "I'll have something in a few hours." What Wu Jin had 4 hours later was more than Jitai had asked for, because Wu Jin was thorough, and being thorough was how you stayed useful to Kang Jitai. She was 31. She'd come to Seoul 3 years ago from Lagos via a cybersecurity fellowship at a firm that had subsequently hired her full-time as a senior engineer. She was well regarded in her field. Wu Jin had found 2 professional write-ups and 1 conference presentation she'd given on network penetration testing that had apparently been considered a notable contribution to something Jitai didn't know enough about to evaluate. She had a clean record. She had an apartment in Mapogu. She had an Instagram account that was public. Jitai looked at the Instagram account. It was not what he had expected, though he would have been unable to say precisely what he had expected. It was vivid. She had photographs of Seoul street food, of her friends at various restaurant tables, of sunsets from what appeared to be a rooftop, of her own meals that she captioned with the particular sharp humor of someone who was funny in the same register as being honest. There were videos of her cooking in what was clearly her apartment kitchen. There was a video of her attempting to explain a technical concept to, apparently, nobody, talking directly into the camera with the ease of someone who was comfortable being seen, and getting exasperated with her own explanation and laughing at herself. She had captions in English and Yoruba and occasional Korean. She had 4,300 followers. Jitai created an Instagram account for the first time in his life. He did not post anything. He didn't use his name. He followed her account. Then he set down his phone and sat with the specific quality of embarrassment that a 34-year-old man who runs a criminal organization feels when he has just done something that would be categorized as pining. He recognized the feeling from a very long time ago, from before he was Jitai who runs things, from when he was just Jitai who was nobody in particular, and he sat with it for a moment and then put it away because putting things away was a skill he had spent years developing. He put it away incompletely, it turned out. She found him at the street food stand 3 weeks later. He hadn't engineered it. This mattered to him, the not engineering of it, because Jitai was not a man who left much to chance, and there was something that felt like a line he was not willing to cross between finding out where someone is and showing up at places where someone might be. He'd looked at her Instagram. He'd noticed, because he noticed everything, that she frequently posted photographs of Teok Bokki from a specific stand near Hongik University, identifiable by the orange awning and the cluster of plastic stools and the halogen lamp hanging above the counter that gave everything that warm, overexposed glow that showed up in every one of her pictures from the place. He had, separately, a reason to be in that neighborhood on that particular Tuesday evening that had nothing to do with orange awnings or halogen lamps. This was true. He believed it to be true. He was standing at the counter waiting for an order he'd placed more out of habit than hunger when he heard her voice. She was talking to the woman who ran the stand. In Korean, halting, determined, grammatically adventurous Korean that the stand owner was following with the patient goodwill of someone who has learned to interpret context clues. Zuri was pointing at the fish cake skewers and asking a question that got garbled somewhere in the middle, and then she switched to English and said, Sorry, the long ones. Can I get 4 of those?" And the stand owner nodded and reached for the skewers. And Zuri exhaled and looked up, found Jitai looking at her. A beat. She said, "You're the gun bracelet." He said, "Kang Jitai." "I know," she said, and something in her voice had shifted, gained an edge of something. Not fear, still not fear, but something more considered. She glanced at his wrist, where the bracelet was, and then back at his face. "You have an Instagram account. A very new Instagram account. That follows exactly 1 person." He said nothing. She said, "That person is me." "Yes." "Okay." She accepted the fish cake skewers from the stand owner and paid, and then looked at him again. There was a pause in which she appeared to be deciding something. So are you going to tell me who you actually are, or are we doing this dance where I already know and you pretend I don't? Who do you think I am? Jitai asked. I think, Zuri said carefully, that you are someone whose name gets said in a specific tone of voice. I think I've worked in Seoul for 3 years and I know what that tone sounds like, and someone used it when I mentioned your name last week. She tilted her head. I also think that the empty seats on the subway around you were not a coincidence. He said, They weren't. Right. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her think, watched the decision form and settle. Then she gestured at the plastic stools. I'm going to eat my fish cake. You can sit here and tell me why you made an Instagram account to follow one person. Or you can leave. Either way, I'm eating the fish cake. Jitai sat down. He sat down, and she sat down across from him with the fish cake skewers and a small cup of the spicy broth the stand served, and she looked at him and said, So, I wanted to know who you were, he said. You could have just asked. You were gone before I thought to. She studied him. And the Instagram? He looked at the skewers she was eating, back at her. He said, I'm not entirely sure. It wasn't planned. She laughed, same as on the train, real and short and slightly surprised by itself. Kangji Tai, who I am choosing to believe is a very serious man, made a burner Instagram to follow my cooking videos. And the conference presentation on network penetration testing. She stopped, stared at him. You watched that? It was well structured. It's 40 minutes long. I'm aware. Something crossed her face that he couldn't fully classify. She said, Okay, you're strange. But the word strange in her mouth didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like a category she was placing him in that she was still actively examining. She put a fish cake skewer down and folded her arms on the counter and looked at him directly, and she said, Let me be honest with you about something. All right, I know what kind of person you are. I'm not naive. I know what the empty seats mean, and I know why people say your name like that. She paused. And I also know that you sat on a train for 7 minutes without moving while I slept on your shoulder, and that you went to the trouble of watching a 40-minute conference presentation, and I don't know what to do with that contradiction yet. Jitai said, You don't have to do anything with it. I know. She picked up the skewer again. I'm just telling you I'm aware of it, because I don't function well when I'm pretending not to know things. That's a useful quality in cybersecurity. It's a useful quality in general. She met his eyes. Are you going to try to get something from me? My access, my skills, whatever? No. Are you sure? I'm sure. She studied him for another long moment. The halogen lamp hummed above them, and the stand owner was ignoring them with admirable professionalism, and the street was doing the ordinary Friday night things that streets do, full of people moving between one place and another. Zuri said, Then we can have dinner, actual dinner, not fish cake on stools. Next week sometime, if you want. Jitai said, I want. She nodded, ate a fish cake, said, You're going to have to learn to hold a conversation that isn't 3 words long, you know? I can do that. I'm going to need more evidence. He said, You told me your name on the train before I asked for it. And? Most people wait. They give their name when they think they need to. You gave it like it was the natural next thing. She looked at him sideways. That's called being friendly. I know. I was noting it. You were noting it. She shook her head, but she was almost smiling. 3 words, or a full anthropology report. No in-between with you. I'm still learning the in-between, Jitai said, and meant it more literally than she would know yet. But they had dinner the following Thursday at a small galbi place in Yeonam-dong that had 8 tables and no menu on the wall and required reservations that Jitai had obtained through means that had nothing to do with the standard waiting list, but that produced the same result, a table in the corner, away from the window, which Zuri noticed and said nothing about. She had changed out of work clothes into something that was still put together but easier, and she'd taken the lanyard off this time, and she arrived 3 minutes early and was already studying the table when he walked in. You're on time, she said when he sat down. I'm always on time. I'm always early, which means I had to sit here by myself and pretend to be very interested in the wood grain of this table. She looked at him. Order the short ribs. They're why this place exists. He ordered the short ribs. She ordered the short ribs and two sides and then started talking about her work week, about the server crisis that had been ongoing since the Friday he'd first met her, about the specific category of professional frustration that comes from fixing a catastrophic system failure, only to discover that the root cause was the IT director ignoring a warning that had been in the system for 6 months. So basically, she said, I spent 12 hours in a server room because someone didn't read an email. Did you tell them that? I wrote it in the incident report in the most technically precise language I could find, which allowed it to be clearly understood while also being not something you could get me fired for. Efficient. I thought so. She accepted the small cups of banchan the server brought and reorganized them on the table with the efficiency of someone who has eaten at Korean restaurants enough to have opinions about the layout. What do you do with your weeks? Actually, what is a normal week for you? He said, administration, problem solving, meetings. With? He looked at her. She said, okay, different question. What do you do when something goes wrong? Define wrong. For you, in your world. She was watching him carefully, but it wasn't the hypervigilance of someone who's afraid. It was the watching of someone who is genuinely trying to understand the shape of a thing she hasn't encountered before. What does wrong look like, and what do you do about it? Depends on the nature of the problem, he said. Most problems are resource problems. Someone needs something they don't have, or they have something they shouldn't. The solution is usually moving those resources correctly. And when it's not a resource problem, he was quiet for a moment. Then it's a people problem, and those are messier. What do you do about people problems? What do you do about yours? He said, turning it back. She tilted her head. I figure out what the person actually wants versus what they're saying they want, because those are almost never the same thing. And then I address the actual thing. It's slower. It works better. Jitai said, that's what I do. She looked at him for a moment. Huh, she said, like she was filing something. The short ribs came. They ate, and she talked more than he did. She had a conversational energy that was generous in the way of someone who has learned that conversation is how you find out what people are actually made of. And he listened with the full attention quality that he brought to everything, which she appeared to notice. You're a good listener, she said at one point. I've been told that. Like it's a skill you cultivated. It is, she laughed. Most people would say thank you. Most people who say thank you mean they're glad you noticed them. I'm saying it's a skill I cultivated. There's a difference. Yes. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, you're weird. I like it. And then she went back to the short ribs as if she hadn't just said something that landed somewhere in Jitai's chest with a weight that he hadn't expected and wouldn't have predicted. By the time they left, it was close to 11, and the street was still busy with the particular aliveness of Yeonam-dong on weeknights. The small bars with their doors propped open, the couple arguing quietly on a corner, the group of university students navigating the narrow sidewalk. Zuri put her jacket on and looked at the street and then back at him. Same time next week? She said. Jitai said, yes. She nodded, started to walk toward the main road, turned back once. Jitai. He looked at her. The Instagram account. You can keep following me, but next time you want to know something, you can ask directly. He said, I know. Good, she said, and walked. The weeks built themselves around the dinners the way weeks will, when you introduce a fixed point that wasn't there before. Thursday evenings became a structural fact. They moved through neighborhoods, Itaewon, Seongsu, back to Yeonam-dong, and then out to a Vietnamese place in Mapo-gu that Zuri had found through a coworker, and that turned out to be the best pho either of them had eaten. They argued about food. This started the third week when Zuri made the position, held firmly and with evidence, that Nigerian jollof rice was the superior rice dish in the world, and Jitai said that he had never eaten it and therefore had no basis for comparison, and she said that this was exactly the problem. You've never had jollof rice. I've never had the occasion. The occasion is every occasion. She was looking at him across a table in a way that suggested this was a genuine failing she had identified. How have you been eating for 34 years without jollof rice? Korean food is comprehensive. Korean food is excellent. Jollof rice is transcendent. These are compatible positions. He said, make it for me then. She said without hesitation, okay. She made it the following Saturday in her apartment in Mapugu, which was the first time Jitai had been in her apartment, and which was also, he noted, the first time he had been in a space that belonged to someone else, and felt something that could be described as comfortable rather than strategically assessed. Her apartment was the size of his living room, and it was full of books stacked on surfaces, a small orange rug that was clearly not from Korea, photographs pinned to a corkboard, a set of mismatched mugs on the counter, plants on the window ledge in various states of health that suggested she cared about them and also sometimes forgot about them. She cooked with the same energy she brought to everything, purposeful, slightly loud, narrating the process with the explanatory fluency of someone who has described things professionally for years. Long grain rice, this is important. Don't let anyone tell you short grain is acceptable. Tomatoes, peppers, these are blended first. The base is everything. The base is what most people mess up. Jitai sat on a counter stool and watched and said, when she paused, "What do people mess up? They rush the base. They don't let it cook down long enough so it doesn't develop. Here, smell this." She held the pot toward him. He leaned forward. The smell was deep and rich and layered, tomato and pepper and spice, and something smokier underneath. She said, "That's the start. It'll be different in 40 minutes. That's the point." He sat back. "You're patient about this." "I'm patient about things I care about." She went back to the pot. "I'm impatient about things I don't, such as stupidity that could be avoided, red tape that serves no one, IT directors who don't read emails." She didn't look up from the stove. "What are you impatient about?" He thought about it, genuinely rather than reaching for a ready answer. "Disloyalty," he said finally. "I don't have patience for it, and people who perform confidence they don't have." She looked up at that. What's the difference between real confidence and performed confidence? Real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. She studied him for a second. "You know what's interesting about that?" "What?" "You said that about yourself without knowing you said it about yourself." Jitai was quiet. She smiled, not the short, surprised laugh from before, something quieter, and went back to the pot. The jollof rice was, he admitted when they sat down to eat it, the best rice he had ever eaten. And he said this plainly and without qualification. And she looked at him across the small table with an expression he was slowly developing the ability to read, which was the expression she made when he said something she'd expected him to minimize instead. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not performing it." "I know," she said. That's why it counts." It was raining by the time he left. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the rain sound against the windows of the building, and she stood in the doorframe and said, "Same time Thursday." "Yes," he said. He walked to his car, and the rain was cold and clean, and he thought about the 40 minutes it took for a base to develop into something different, and about the way she'd said that's why it counts with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has learned to distinguish between things that count and things that don't. And he drove back through Seoul with something sitting in his chest that he was not going to name yet, because naming things made them real, and real things could be lost. And the thought of losing this particular thing, his phone rang. It was Dai-ho. "We have a problem," Dai-ho said. Jitai pulled over to the side of the road. Outside the window, the city blurred in the rain. "Tell me." The Busan faction made a move. Not Yeongdongpo this time. Dai-ho's voice was flat with the specific flatness that meant he was managing something he'd rather not have to manage. "They hit one of the Mapogu collection points. 3 of our men are in the hospital. The collector, Kim Seong-jae. They took him." Jitai was very still. "How long ago?" 90 minutes. We just got confirmation." Jitai looked at the rain on the windshield. He thought about Zuri's apartment, which was in Mapo-gu. He thought about the small orange rug and the plants on the window ledge and the 40-minute base that turned into something else, if you had patience for it. He said, "Who made the call in Busan?" "We think it's Park Sung-min. New blood. Young. Trying to make a statement." Then he made it. Jitai put the car back in gear. "I need everyone at the Gangnam location in 40 minutes. Tell them to be clean about getting there." "And Kim Seong-jae?" Jitai said, "We're getting him back." And the certainty in his voice was the kind that didn't leave room for other possibilities. And Dai-ho said nothing more because there was nothing more to say. Jitai drove through the rain and Seoul moved around him, and somewhere behind him in a sixth-floor apartment in Mapogu, a woman was washing dishes with the radio on and had no idea that the city had just pivoted on its axis in a way that was going to make the next weeks very complicated, and that one of the complications, the one he couldn't yet see clearly enough to plan for, was the question of what you do when the most dangerous situation you've walked into in years is not the one with the guns. The Gangnam location was a private parking structure on the 4th and 5th levels of a building that officially housed a logistics consulting firm and unofficially housed every significant operational decision that Kang Ji-tae had made in the last 6 years. By the time Ji-tae's car pulled into the 4th level, 9 men were already there, standing in the particular arrangement of people who have been told to wait and are bad at it. Weight shifting, hands in pockets, the low murmur of conversation that stops when the elevator opens. They stopped when Ji-tae stepped out. He walked to the center of the space without hurrying and looked at the 9 faces looking back at him and said, "Where are we?" Daeho stepped forward. He was a compact man with a wide jaw and the permanently tired eyes of someone who manages too many variables at once and has learned to function on the adrenaline of the variables themselves. He had a folder in his hand that he didn't open. Kim Seung-jae was taken from the Mapogu point at approximately 8:15. 2 of our 3 injured men have non-critical wounds. The third, he paused a fraction of a second. Jung-ho is in surgery. They hit him in the shoulder and he lost a lot of blood before the ambulance got there. The space was very quiet. The collection point itself, Ji-tae said. They cleared the cash, left everything else. So it was surgical. Practiced, Daeho said. 4 men, in and out, in under 8 minutes. They knew the layout. They knew the timing. Ji-tae looked at the folder Daeho wasn't opening. Say the rest of it. Daeho said, "The timing, the Tuesday schedule you moved from Wednesday. Only the people in this room knew about that change." The 9 men standing in the parking structure heard this, and the quality of the silence changed. It thickened, became a thing with weight. Ji-tae looked at the 9 faces. He looked at them slowly, one at a time, without any particular expression on his face, and the looking was worse than if he'd said anything because it meant he was counting and assessing and filing, and every person in that room knew that Ji-tae's assessments were not things you appealed later. They were verdicts. He said, "I'm going to find out which one of you talked." Nobody spoke. "I'm going to find out because I always find out. The question is whether whoever it is makes this easier or harder. Easier looks like them telling me now. Harder." He stopped, didn't finish the sentence. The unfinished sentence did more work than any ending would have. The silence stretched. Nobody spoke. Ji-tae said, "Woojin." A younger man near the back straightened. "Boss? Pull every communication log you can access from the last 72 hours. Every call, every message, every platform. You have until morning." "Yes, boss. The rest of you. I need 2 teams. First team goes to the Busan faction's known contact point in Dongjak-gu. You're watching, not engaging. I want to know who comes and goes and when." He looked at Daeho. "Second team." "Kim Seung-jae," Daeho said. "He's been with us for 11 years. We find him." Ji-tae said this flatly, as if it were already a completed action, and this current moment was simply the logistics of confirming it. Park Sung-min made a statement. The statement has been received. Now we answer it. "How do we answer it?" one of the men asked. His name was Byung-soo, 41 years old, one of the older members of the operation, and someone who sometimes asked questions that other people only thought. Ji-tae looked at him. "We answer it by being smarter and more patient than he is, which shouldn't be difficult since he just announced himself by doing something loud. He took one of ours, and now we know exactly what he's willing to do and what he thinks will rattle us. That's information." Ji-tae looked around the room. "Loud moves are easy moves. They don't require intelligence, just nerve. Whatever you think about Park Sung-min, he has nerve. What he doesn't have is experience with what happens after you make a loud move." He walked back toward the elevator. Behind him, Daeho said quietly, "For Ji-tae's ears only." "And if the leak is in this room," Ji-tae said, without turning around, "then someone in this room has made the worst decision of their life, and they'll understand that soon enough." He pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened. He got in. The doors closed on 9 men in a parking structure, and the weight of what he hadn't said settled over all of them like weather. He didn't sleep that night. This wasn't unusual. There were categories of nights that didn't permit sleep, and a breach, and a taken man, and a leak in his own operation put this night firmly in that category. He sat in the residence with the city lights below him and worked through the architecture of the problem the way he worked through all problems, methodically, without the luxury of panic, peeling back layer after layer until he could see the shape of the thing clearly enough to address it. The Busan faction had intelligence they shouldn't have had. The intelligence was operational and recent. 4 people had known about the Tuesday schedule change before it became necessary to brief the broader team. Himself, Dae-ho, his logistics coordinator Soo-hyun, and his Mapo-gu point supervisor, who was currently in the hospital with a shoulder wound and hadn't known about the schedule change until 20 minutes before it took effect, which made his window too narrow to be the source. That left Dae-ho and Soo-hyun. Ji-tae had known Dae-ho for 9 years. He had known Soo-hyun for 3. In his work, the calculation was never "I trust this person." Trust was a feeling, and feelings didn't hold under pressure. The calculation was "this person's interests are aligned with mine, and I understand why." With Dae-ho, the alignment had been verified across years of situations that would have created leverage if it was going to, and hadn't. With Soo-hyun, the verification was shorter, and that was a relevant data point. He sat with this, and didn't reach a conclusion, because reaching a conclusion before Woo Jin's communication analysis came back was the kind of move that closed off the possibility of being wrong, and being wrong about who the leak was carried costs he wasn't willing to pay. His phone showed 2:47 a.m. He picked it up and put it down again. He was not going to text Zuri at 2:47 a.m. He was absolutely clear about this. He had known her for 11 weeks, and their acquaintance, whatever it was, existed in a different compartment from the one he was currently sitting in, and keeping those compartments separate was not cruelty, it was basic structural maintenance. He picked up the phone again and looked at her Instagram. She'd posted something 2 hours ago, a photograph of a bowl of ramen with the caption, "Corporate Mandated Emotional Labor Day 4, Eating Feelings, 10 out of 10 recommend." The photograph was good. She had an eye for light. He put the phone down. He thought about her telling him that she didn't function well when she was pretending not to know things. He thought about Dae-ho saying, "You sound different tonight." He thought about the 9 men in the parking structure and the shape of the silence when he'd said, "Which one of you talked?" And he sat with the awareness that the version of himself that existed in that parking structure and the version of himself that had sat on a counter stool watching Zuri cook jollof rice were the same person, and that this should feel like a contradiction and somehow didn't. And he didn't know what to do with that. He stayed up until 4 a.m. and then slept for 3 hours with the discipline of someone who has learned to take sleep in whatever window it presents. Woo Jin's report came at 8:15 in the morning. Ji-tae read it at the small table in the resident's kitchen over coffee he didn't taste, and by the time he reached the 3rd page, he had stopped moving entirely. He sat very still and read through to the end. Then he set the report down and looked at the surface of the coffee for a moment, and then he called Dae-ho. Dae-ho picked up on the 2nd ring. Ji-tae said, "Come to the residence. Bring Soo-hyun." A pause. "Both of us?" "Both of you." Another pause. "Boss?" "I know," Ji-tae said. "Come anyway." Soo-hyun was 29 years old and had come to the organization through a connection 3 years ago that Ji-tae had considered thoroughly at the time. He was good at the logistics work, precise, thorough, didn't need to be told the same thing twice. He had a younger sister in university in Daejeon who he sent money to every month, which Ji-tae knew because Ji-tae knew these kinds of things about the people who worked for him. He sat across from Ji-tae in the resident's living room with the particular quality of someone who knows why they've been summoned and has spent the drive over deciding what to do about it. His hands were in his lap. He was not fidgeting. The not fidgeting took visible effort. Dae-ho stood near the window. Ji-tae put Woo Jin's report on the table between them. Soo-hyun looked at it, looked at Ji-tae. His jaw moved slightly, once, like he was testing the weight of a sentence before deciding not to say it. Ji-tae said, "The report shows a messaging application that I wasn't aware you used for operational communication." Soo-hyun said nothing. "The application uses end-to-end encryption, which means the content of the messages isn't recoverable. What is recoverable is the metadata. Frequency, timing, the pattern of contact with a number that traces to Dongjak-gu." Soo-hyun's breathing had changed. Shallow, measured, the controlled breathing of someone managing something physically large. Ji-tae said, "The contact pattern started 6 weeks ago." A beat. Soo-hyun said, I can explain. Don't explain yet, Ji-tae said. Just confirm. A longer silence. Soo-hyun looked at the report, looked at his own hands. He said, yes. Dae-ho made a sound near the window that wasn't a word. Ji-tae said, why? Soo-hyun's hands came together in his lap. They had my sister. He said it with the flatness of someone who has spent a night deciding to say it and has depleted all the emotion from the delivery in the preparation. They found her in Daejeon. He stopped, started again. They told me it was information only, that nobody would get hurt. They said the Tuesday schedule was all they wanted, and then they'd let her go. And Young-ho, Ji-tae said, who is in surgery right now. Soo-hyun closed his eyes briefly. Ji-tae said, and Kim Seung-jae, who has a wife and 2 children in Nowon, and who nobody has heard from in 16 hours. I didn't know they were going to... Soo-hyun's voice broke on the last word, just slightly, a hairline fracture. I thought it was information. I thought they just wanted the schedule. They told you what you needed to believe, Ji-tae said, not with anger, with the flat precision of a diagnosis. That's what leverage does. It tells you what you need to believe so you'll make the choice they need you to make. He looked at Soo-hyun's face. Is your sister safe? Soo-hyun looked up. The surprise of the question was visible. Yes. They let her go 2 days ago. Where is she now? At her dormitory. She's not there anymore, Ji-tae said. I had her moved this morning when Woo-jin identified the contact number. She's at a secure location. She doesn't know why. She's been told it's a building maintenance situation. He paused. She's safe. She'll stay safe. Soo-hyun stared at him. Something complicated was happening in his face. Relief and shame in a combination that had no clean expression. Ji-tae said, you should have told me the moment they made contact. I was afraid, Soo-hyun said. Of them or of me? A long pause. Both. Ji-tae looked at him for a moment. He said, you are not able to work for me after this. You understand that. Soo-hyun nodded, and the nodding was very small and very tired. But you're not going to be harmed, Ji-tae said. You'll receive what you're owed through the end of this month. After that, you and your sister move. Somewhere that isn't Daejeon. Woo-jin will help you with the logistics. You don't contact anyone from the organization. You don't speak about anything you know. You build something else. Soo-hyun was very still. Why? Ji-tae said, because they put you in an impossible position on purpose. That's not your weakness. That's their strategy. He picked up the report and set it aside. But you still chose. And choosing has consequences, even when the choice was the worst of the available options. Dae-ho said from the window. Boss, his voice was carefully neutral. That's more than he's owed. Maybe, Ji-tae said. But it's what I'm giving him. Soo-hyun stood up. He looked like a man who had been expecting something very different and was still processing the gap between the expectation and the reality. He said, Kim Seung-jae. Isn't your problem to solve, Ji-tae said. Go. Woo-jin will call you with the details about your sister. Soo-hyun walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, not looking back. He said, I'm sorry. And it was the kind of sorry that knows it doesn't fix anything and says itself anyway because there's nothing else. He left. The door closed. Dae-ho turned from the window. His face was doing the thing it did when he had strong opinions that he was deciding how to present. He said, that was generous. It was strategic, Ji-tae said. There's a difference. If I handle him badly, the next person in his position goes directly to the other side instead of coming to me. If I handle him the way I just did, people learn that coming to you is survivable. Yes. Dae-ho was quiet a moment. Then, they targeted Soo-hyun specifically. They found his sister. That's research. That's preparation. Park Sung-min did his homework. He's more organized than we thought. Ji-tae stood up. He's organized and he's young, and he got the result he wanted in round 1, which means he thinks he understands how we operate. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He doesn't. He understands how we've operated. That's not the same thing. What are we doing? Dae-ho said. Ji-tae said, we get Kim Seung-jae back. Quietly. And then we renegotiate every boundary line with Busan in a way that makes the cost of this particular move very clear. He looked at Dae-ho. Not loud, smart. Dae-ho nodded. And the leak problem going forward? Smaller circles. For every sensitive decision, I want to know who needs to know and who is being given that access because it's convenient. Jitai put on his jacket. Convenience is a vulnerability. Kim Seung-jae was found 2 days later in a storage unit in Gurogu, cold and badly dehydrated but alive. And the men who found him didn't speak about what the finding looked like or what condition the storage unit was in, because some things you do for the organization and then you put in a box and close the lid on. Seung-jae was taken to a private doctor. His wife was called. Jitai visited him the following afternoon and sat with him for 20 minutes and said very little, because there are situations where silence is more honest than anything you could organize into words, and Seung-jae knew Jitai well enough to understand the silence as what it was. Jitai left the private clinic and sat in his car for a moment before starting it. He was tired in the specific way of several days of sustained tension. Not the tiredness that sleep fixes, but the kind that accumulates in the shoulders and behind the eyes, and in the part of your thinking that's supposed to generate solutions, which now generates solutions more slowly. He sat and breathed and looked at the parking lot and thought about nothing for approximately 45 seconds, which was more nothing than he'd thought about in 3 days. His phone showed 3 messages from Dae-ho about the Busan situation, which he'd address in an hour. It showed 1 message from Woo Jin confirming Soo-hyun and his sister were resettled, and it showed a message from Zuri sent that morning that said, "Haven't heard from you in 4 days, you okay?" He looked at the message for a long moment. 4 days. She'd counted 4 days. He typed, "I'm okay." Things got complicated. Her reply came back in under a minute. Complicated how? Or is that a you don't say thing? He thought about that. He typed, "It's a me not wanting to put it in a message thing." "Okay," she sent back. "Thursday still?" "Yes," he wrote. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I made you something, I was stress cooking, and there's too much agusi soup for 1 person. It'll keep until Thursday, but just so you know it exists." He read this twice. He typed, "You stress cook? I stress cook, stress clean, and stress reorganize my bookshelf by color instead of by author, which I always regret. It's a whole system." Despite himself, despite the parking lot and the private clinic and the 3 days that had just concluded and the Busan situation that hadn't, he almost smiled. He wrote, "I'll be there Thursday." "Good," she said. And then after a pause, "I'm glad you're okay." He put the phone down. He sat in the parking lot for another minute, the city doing its ordinary afternoon things around him, and he thought about what it meant that the first thing he'd felt when he saw her message, before the consideration of appropriate replies, before the assessment of what to say and what not to say, was something simple and immediate that didn't have a strategic component at all. He thought about that. Started the car, pulled out of the lot. He thought about Dae-ho saying he's more organized than we thought. He thought about the 9 men in the parking structure and the question of who'd known what. He thought about Soo-hyun's face when Jitai had told him his sister was already safe. The specific devastated relief of someone who'd been carrying something unbearable and suddenly wasn't. He was 3 blocks from the clinic when his phone rang through the car speakers. Unknown number. He accepted. A voice said, "Kang Jitai." It was a young voice, relaxed in the particular way of someone who is performing relaxation over something that isn't. Jitai said, "Park Sung-min." A beat, then a sound that might have been amusement. Faster than I expected. "You did your homework on my organization," Jitai said. "It's not unreasonable that I do the same." "Fair enough." The voice shifted, lost the performance, became more direct, which was somehow more unnerving than the performance. "You got your man back." "I did." "I want you to know that was always the plan. He was a message, not a hostage." "The message was received," Jitai said. "Poorly. I imagine." Pause. "I want to meet." Jitai said, "No." "No? You took one of my people, put 3 others in the hospital, and compromised someone's family to get operational intelligence? A meeting now is a reward. We don't meet until there's a basis for conversation." Silence on the line. Jitai said, "You want territory. You want to expand your operation into the western districts. That's what all of this is about." Sung-min said carefully, "You seem very certain." "I'm certain because it's the only reason that justifies the risk level of what you just did. And it's also the reason it won't work the way you planned." "Why not?" Jitai said, because now I know exactly what you want, which means I know every leverage point you have and every vulnerability you've created by moving early. He paused. You're smart, but you moved before you were ready. Young people do that. They confuse nerve with readiness. A longer silence, then, so what happens now? Now, Jitai said, you wait, and you think about what kind of organization you actually want to be and what price you're willing to pay for it. And in 6 weeks, if you want to have a conversation, you contact Daiho through the proper channel, and we arrange something neutral. 6 weeks is a long time. Yes, Jitai said. It is. He ended the call. The traffic light in front of him was red. He sat at it, hands on the wheel, and felt the call settle into the calculation he was running and thought about what Sungmin's voice had given him. The slight hesitation before fair enough, the shift when he'd stopped performing, the silence when Jitai had named the territory play directly. Young, capable, rattled in exactly the right place. The light changed. He drove. He was already thinking about Thursday, about a goosey soup he'd never eaten and a woman who reorganized her bookshelves by color when she was stressed, and who had noticed his absence in 4 days and said, I'm glad you're okay with the flat, simple honesty of someone who meant it without needing it to be complicated. He was thinking about that, and about the 9 men in the parking structure, and about Soo Hyun's face, and about the 6-week window he'd just bought, and about how all of these things were happening inside the same life simultaneously, and that this used to feel like the natural order of things, the operational weight, the calculation, the management of variables. And now it felt like weight in a way it hadn't quite felt before, because there was something else to weigh it against. That was a new development. He wasn't sure yet if it was a vulnerability or something else entirely, and he was still turning the question over when he pulled onto the highway and his phone rang again. This time Daiho. This time something in his voice that made Jitai's hands tighten on the wheel before Daiho had finished the first sentence. We have a problem, Daiho said. Sungmin didn't just compromise Soo Hyun. Jitai said, Tell me. Woojin found a second contact, not logistics, deeper. A pause that had weight in it. Boss, the second contact is in the financial layer. The highway moved beneath the car. Jitai said, How deep? Daiho said, Deep enough that if the information leaves the organization, it doesn't just compromise an operation. It compromises everything. The accounts, the structure, the names. Jitai was very still. Including, Daiho said quietly, the Mapogu property records. The ones in the third shell company. The Mapogu property records. The ones that, if someone followed them with sufficient determination and the right resources, connected through 3 layers of corporate structure to a small apartment building on a specific street where a woman on the 6th floor was currently, in all probability, reorganizing her bookshelves by color and had no idea that the man she'd invited to dinner on Thursday had just found out that his world had gotten close enough to hers to become dangerous to her in ways she couldn't see coming, and he hadn't protected her from because he hadn't known there was anything to protect her from until Jitai pulled off the highway at the next exit without signaling, a move so abrupt that the car behind him laid on the horn for a full 3 seconds, and he didn't hear it. He pulled into the forecourt of a closed gas station, stopped the car, and sat. How long has the second contact been active? He said. Daiho's voice through the speakers was careful in the way it got when Daiho was managing the delivery of something he knew would land badly. Woojin thinks 8 weeks. Maybe 9. 8 weeks. Jitai had known Zuri for 11. He said, Who is it? We don't have a name yet. Woojin has the contact signature, the device fingerprint, the communication pattern. But whoever it is, they're more careful than Soo Hyun was. The metadata is clean. They used rotating numbers. Someone with technical knowledge. Yes. Jitai looked at the dark forecourt of the gas station. A plastic bag moved across the concrete in the wind, slow and aimless. He said, The Mapogu property records. Walk me through exactly what's accessible. Daiho walked him through it. It took 4 minutes, and by the end of it, Jitai understood the full shape of the exposure with the cold clarity of someone who has just watched a structure he built over years develop a crack that runs from the foundation to the top floor. The third shell company held 2 property assets in Mapogu. Both were legitimate on the surface, a small commercial space and a residential building, both generating real rental income, both carrying clean paper trails through 2 layers of corporate structure. But the third layer, the one that connected to Jitai's actual financial architecture, was thinner than it should have been. He'd known this. He'd flagged it internally 8 months ago as something to restructure before it became a problem. He hadn't restructured it yet because there hadn't been time, and because the exposure had felt theoretical. The exposure was no longer theoretical. The residential building, Jitai said. What floor is the financial record concern on? Daeho said, It's not floor specific. The concern is the ownership chain. If someone with legal authority subpoenas the third company's records, that's not what I'm asking. Jitai said it quietly. The residential building itself. Does any of our operational activity touch the physical location? A pause. No. It's purely a financial holding, clean tenants, regular management. Jitai breathed. She was not in the building because of him. She'd been in Mapo-gu before he'd known she existed, renting from a management company that had no idea who ultimately owned the building's parent corporation. It was coincidence in the purest and most absurd sense, the kind of coincidence that you couldn't have engineered if you tried, which meant that nobody had engineered it, which meant that the threat to her was indirect and structural rather than targeted. This was the best possible version of the information he'd just received. It was still not good. Move the Mapo-gu assets, Jitai said. Start the restructuring tonight. I don't care what it costs or how fast we have to move. I want those 2 properties out of the third shell company and into a clean structure with no connection to anything else by end of week. That's, Daeho started. I know what it is. Do it. Yes, boss. And find the second contact, Jitai said. That's the priority now. Not Sungmin, not the Western District situation. Find the person inside our financial layer who has been talking to someone for 8 weeks and find them before they pass anything further. He ended the call. He sat in the closed gas station forecourt for 3 more minutes, which was the amount of time it took for the worst of the cold clarity to metabolize into something workable. And then he started the car and drove. He did not drive to the residence. He drove to Wu Jin's location instead. Done. Wu Jin worked out of a legitimate tech consultancy in Mapo-gu that Jitai had set up 4 years ago as both a revenue source and a plausible cover for the technical work that Wu Jin actually did. The consultancy occupied the 3rd floor of a building that had a chicken restaurant on the ground floor and a tutoring academy on the 2nd, and at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday the building was mostly dark except for the 3rd floor, where Wu Jin's monitors were always on. Jitai walked in without knocking. Wu Jin was at the central desk with 3 screens running and a cup of coffee that had clearly been there long enough to be cold, and he looked up when Jitai came through the door and had the specific expression of a man who has been waiting for this visit. Jitai sat down in the chair beside the desk. He said, "Show me what you have." Wu Jin showed him. The communication analysis was thorough. 7 pages of pattern data, device fingerprints, timing correlations. Wu Jin narrated it in the precise flat tone he used when he was giving information he found personally disturbing, a tone Jitai had learned to read as Wu Jin's version of alarm. The second contact had been careful. They hadn't used the same number twice. They hadn't communicated from the same location more than once. The messages themselves were unrecoverable, which was intentional. Whoever this was, they understood digital hygiene in a way that Soo-hyun hadn't. They'd been doing this longer, or they'd had help setting it up, or both. What they hadn't been careful enough about was time. "The pattern," Jitai said, pointing at the timing graph on the center screen. "Yes." Wu Jin pulled the graph larger. "The contact always initiates within a 2-hour window on Monday evenings, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., every week for 8 weeks. Monday evenings. Yes." Jitai looked at the graph. He said, "Who in the financial layer has a standing commitment on Monday evenings?" Wu Jin said carefully, "That's the part I was going to bring to you." He opened a separate window. An internal scheduling document, the kind Jitai had implemented 2 years ago for the senior operational staff, a shared calendar that allowed him to know where people were during key windows without having to ask. He'd implemented it after a situation in Incheon that had required 30 minutes to locate a key person during a time-sensitive problem, and 30 minutes had been 25 too many. The calendar showed Monday evenings. The calendar showed one name with a recurring Monday evening block marked as personal. Jitai looked at the name. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Get out." Wu Jin said, "Boss, step outside. Give me 10 minutes." Wu Jin got up and left without another word, pulling the door closed behind him. Jitai sat alone with the monitors and the cold coffee and the name on the screen, and he put his elbows on the desk and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and stayed like that for a period of time that he didn't measure. The name on the screen was Han Dai-ho. He had the conversation in the residence because there were conversations that needed to happen in controlled spaces, and this was one of them. He called Dai-ho at 10:30 p.m. and said, "Come to the residence, now." Dai-ho said, "It's late. Is it Sung-min?" "Now," Jitai said, and hung up. He stood at the window and watched the city while he waited, and he did not think about the 9 years because thinking about the 9 years was the kind of thinking that made you slow when you needed to be fast. He thought instead about the Incheon situation 2 years ago, and the Yeouido refinancing 3 years ago, and the restructuring of the Eastern District supply routes 18 months ago. And he played each of these events back through the new lens and watched them shift, subtly, like objects in a room when the lighting changes. Same room, same objects, entirely different shadows. Dai-ho arrived in 20 minutes. He came through the door with his jacket still on and his keys in his hand, which meant he'd driven himself rather than being driven, which was itself information. A man being driven has a witness to his destination, and Dai-ho had chosen not to have a witness tonight. He stopped when he saw Jitai's face. Not the expression. Jitai's expression was the same as always. Something else. The quality of the stillness, maybe. The particular way Jitai was standing at the window that was different from how he usually stood. Dai-ho said, "What happened?" Jitai said, "Sit down." Jitai. "Sit down, Dai-ho." Dai-ho sat. Jitai stayed at the window for a moment longer, then turned and crossed the room and put Woojin's report on the table in front of Dai-ho, open to the page with the timing graph and the scheduling overlay. Dai-ho looked at it. The silence in the room was different from the silence in the parking structure. That silence had been a crowd holding its breath. This silence was 2 people and 9 years and something breaking between them that was going to be audible when it finished breaking. Dai-ho said, "How long have you known?" 3 hours. Dai-ho looked at the graph. He didn't touch it. He said, "I was going to tell you." Jitai said nothing. "I want you to know that. I was trying to find a way to—" "Don't," Jitai said. Quiet. Final. Dai-ho closed his mouth. Jitai pulled the chair out from across the table and sat down. He leaned forward and put his hands flat on the table and looked at the man he'd trusted for 9 years and said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Every contact, every piece of information you passed, all of it." Dai-ho looked at him for a long moment. His face was doing something complicated. Not the managed neutrality face Jitai had seen across hundreds of situations, but something raw, the face of a man who has been holding a specific weight for 8 weeks and is feeling the particular exhaustion of the moment when you put it down. He said, "Sung-min didn't approach me." Jitai waited. It wasn't the Busan faction. Dai-ho's voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of effort, not ease. It was someone older, someone from before. Before the organization was what it is now, before the structure, before... He stopped, looked at his hands. "Do you remember Lee Jae-won?" Jitai went very still. Lee Jae-won, a name from 12 years ago. A man who had occupied a position in a previous version of the landscape that Jitai had navigated on his way to where he currently stood. A man who had made certain decisions and faced certain consequences and disappeared from Seoul in a way that Jitai had understood to be permanent. "He's not gone," Dai-ho said. "He's been in Japan for 11 years. He's been watching the organization develop, building his own thing quietly, waiting." Jitai said, "Waiting for what?" "For someone inside who could give him the financial architecture." Dai-ho said it plainly, with the resignation of a man past the point of managing how this lands. "He approached me 4 months ago. Not Sung-min, Jae-won. He said he had enough on me personally to end everything, old things, things from before you and I—" He stopped again. "What things?" Jitai said. Dai-ho looked at him. "The Busan incident. From 11 years ago. The one you don't know about." The room was very quiet. Jitai said, "Tell me about the Busan incident from 11 years ago." It took Dai-ho 12 minutes to tell it. Jitai sat and listened, and his face did not change, but something behind it was moving, rearranging itself around the new information, the way a building shifts when a load-bearing element changes. The incident was not something he would have predicted. Not from Daiho, not from that period, not given everything he thought he knew about the years they'd operated together. It was old, and it was specific, and it was exactly the kind of thing that, if it surfaced in the right place with the right documentation, would make it impossible for Daiho to exist in any proximity to the organization without destroying it. Chaewon had held this for 11 years and waited until the leverage was worth using. When Daiho finished, Jitai said, "What did you give him?" "The shell company structure, the financial layer, 3 months of account routing information." Daiho held Jitai's gaze. "Not operational intelligence, not names, not locations. I kept it financial because I thought financial was containable," Jitai said. "Yes." "It's not containable," Jitai said. "You know that." "I know that now." Jitai stood up. He walked to the window again and stood with his back to Daiho and looked at Seoul laid out below him, the grid of lights that had looked the same from this window for 6 years and now looked like a problem he was seeing from a new angle. He said, "Sung-min, the Mapogu hit, Kim Seung-jae, all of it. Was that Jae-won?" Daiho said, "I don't know. I didn't know Sung-min was going to move. I swear to you that is the truth." "But Jae-won could have fed Sung-min information." A pause. "Yes. If he had contact with Busan, it's possible." "So the Busan aggression and the internal leak are connected." Jitai turned from the window. "Jae-won used Sung-min to create external pressure while he was using you to access the financial architecture. Two-sided compression. He was trying to make us look outward while the real move was inward." Daiho said nothing because there was nothing to argue with. "He's going to present the financial records to someone," Jitai said. "That's what the 8 weeks of data collection was for. Not personal gain. He's going to use them to bring institutional pressure on the organization." His jaw tightened, once. "He's going to go to law enforcement." Daiho stood up. "Jitai, that's the play. That's always been the play. He doesn't want money. He wants the organization destroyed and he wants to be standing somewhere clean when it happens." Jitai looked at Daiho with the flat precision he'd used in the parking structure and that Daiho knew, had always known, was the most dangerous version of Jitai's attention. "How much has he already passed?" Daiho said, "I don't know. The last contact was Monday. 3 days ago." "Yes," Jitai said, "so he either already has what he needs or he needed one more transfer. And Monday's contact means he was still asking, which means as of Monday he didn't have everything." He calculated. "Which means we have days, not weeks. Days." Daiho took a breath. "What do you need from me?" Jitai looked at him for a long time. Daiho stood there and took the looking without moving. His hands were at his sides, loose, and his chin was level, and he didn't offer anything more because there was nothing to offer except the standing there, which he did. Jitai said, "I needed your loyalty for 9 years." Daiho said, "You had it for 9 years. And then I made a decision I can't undo, and I've been trying to figure out how to undo it ever since." A pause. "That's not an excuse. It's a fact. Facts don't fix the structural exposure." "No," Daiho said. "They don't." He looked directly at Jitai. "But I know where Jae-won is." The room shifted. Jitai said, "What?" He slipped. "Last Monday. He made contact from the same neighborhood twice. Different numbers, different devices. But the neighborhood was the same. I noticed because I've been looking." Daiho reached into his jacket and put a folded piece of paper on the table. "I was going to bring this to you. I want you to know that. I was finding a way." Jitai looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up yet. He said, "This is how you make it right." "This is how I start," Daiho said. "I know it's not enough." Jitai picked up the paper, looked at the address, looked back at Daiho. "You stay here. You don't call anyone. You don't contact anyone inside the organization until I come back." "And after?" Jitai said, "We deal with after." He walked toward the door. "Woojin is outside the building. He'll be up in 10 minutes. He'll stay with you. You're going to Chaewon." "Yes." "Alone?" Jitai said, "I go alone when I want things handled correctly." He walked out. The address was a service department building in Yoido. Expensive, anonymous, the kind of place that catered to business travelers and people who needed to be in Seoul without being in Seoul, with keycard access and no front desk after 10 p.m. and security cameras that Woo Jin spent 12 minutes finding the access codes for while Jitai drove. Room 1107, Wu Jin said through the phone. Checked in under a Japanese business name, paid 3 months in advance. How long ago? 9 weeks. 1 week before the contact pattern started. Jitai said, Are you in the camera system? Yes. Tell me if anyone approaches the building. He parked 2 streets over and walked. The night was cold and clear, the kind of soul cold that is clean and direct, about being cold without additional commentary, and Jitai walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his pace even, and thought about nothing except the 11 floors between the lobby and room 1107. The elevator was wood-paneled and slow. Jitai stood in it and breathed. He knocked on room 1107 with 3 knocks that were neither loud nor soft. Heard movement inside, waited. The door opened on a chain, one eye visible through the gap. Then the chain dropped and the door opened, and Lee Chae-won stood in the doorway of the serviced apartment looking at Kang Ji-tae with the expression of a man who has spent 11 years preparing for a confrontation and is now inside it and finding that the preparation and the reality are different objects entirely. He was 61, heavier than he'd been, with gray at his temples and the posture of someone who had spent years in a posture of patience. He was in a robe. He'd been ready for bed. He said, "You found me faster than I expected." Ji-tae said, "You made a mistake." "Which one?" Not defensive, genuinely asking, with the quality of a man doing a professional assessment. "You contacted Daiho twice from Yoido in the same week." Ji-tae stepped inside without being invited, and Chae-won moved back to let him, because the alternative was a physical confrontation in a doorway, and Chae-won was not a man who had survived 61 years by making avoidable physical confrontations. "The neighborhood signature," Chae-won said. "I see." He moved to the small sitting area and sat down, with the deliberate composure of someone choosing to conduct this as a conversation rather than something else. "How much does Daiho know that he told you?" "Everything." Chae-won absorbed this. He said, "And what did you do with Daiho?" "That's not your concern," Ji-tae said. "I suppose not?" He looked at Ji-tae with the clear-eyed appraisal of someone who has had time to study a subject from a distance. "You're younger than I expected, not in years, in whatever it is you carry." Ji-tae said, "The financial records you've been collecting." "Yes." "You're going to destroy them." Chae-won looked at him. "Am I?" "You have 2 options. You destroy what you've collected, and you leave Seoul tonight with the understanding that this conversation was the last interaction between us. Or we have a different kind of conversation." Ji-tae held Jae-won's gaze with the flat, complete attention that Jae-won had clearly been studying from a distance, without fully understanding up close. "But before you decide, there's something you should know." Chae-won waited. Ji-tae said, "I know about the law enforcement contact. I know you've been building a case file rather than using this information for direct leverage. I know the intended recipient, and I know the timeline you were working toward." He watched Chae-won's face, watched the composure on it develop a hairline fracture. "What you don't know is that the financial architecture you've been documenting no longer exists. We started the restructuring 3 hours ago. By the time your case file reaches anyone with the authority to act on it, every document in it will be pointing at corporate entities that have already been dissolved and replaced." Chae-won was very still. 11 years, Ji-tae said. 8 weeks of collection, and you waited 1 week too long." The silence in room 1107 was the silence of a man watching something he'd built across 11 years of patience become, in the space of a single conversation, insufficient. Ji-tae watched it happen on Chae-won's face without satisfaction. Satisfaction would have meant something. This was just a problem being resolved. Chae-won said slowly, "You're bluffing." Ji-tae said, "Call it." A long silence. Chae-won said, "If the architecture is already gone, then you have nothing," Ji-tae said, and the choice becomes simpler. Chae-won looked at the window. Outside, Yoido was doing what Yoido does at night. The Han River, dark beyond the lit towers, the bridge lights reflecting in cold water. He looked at it for a moment, and something went through his face that was not quite defeat, but was something adjacent to it. The expression of a man recalculating. He said, "There's a laptop." Ji-tae said, "I know. The files are on it. Encrypted. Woo-jin will handle the encryption." Chae-won looked at him. "You came here alone?" "Yes." You were very sure of yourself. Jitai said, I came here knowing one of two things would happen. This is the better one. He looked around the room. The laptop. Chaewon got up slowly, with the deliberate movements of a man who is being very careful to make no sudden gestures, and retrieved the laptop from the desk by the window. He held it out. Jitai took it. Chaewon said, and the deal. Jitai said, you leave tonight. Japan or somewhere else, I don't care. You don't come back. You don't make contact with anyone connected to this organization. You don't build another case file. He looked at Chaewon with the clear and absolute attention. If I find out you've done any of those things, the conversation we'd have then would not look like this one. Chaewon held his gaze. He said, agreed. Jitai walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said, without turning, you spent 11 years on this. Yes, Chaewon said. It was well constructed. The two-sided compression with Song Min, the patience. Jitai paused. But you trusted Daiho's loyalty to you over his loyalty to me, and that was the miscalculation. He left. He walked back to the elevator and pressed the button and stood in the wood-paneled box going down and held the laptop and thought about what Daiho had said. I was finding a way. Thought about whether he believed it. Thought about 9 years of a man being one thing consistently and then one thing differently, and whether 9 years of consistency was enough weight to put on the other side of the scale. He stepped out of the elevator. His phone buzzed. Woojin, someone just left the building via the fire exit, floor 11. Jitai stopped walking. He looked at the phone. He typed, direction. Woojin, south, toward the river. Jitai stood in the lobby of the serviced apartment building with Lee Jae-won's laptop under his arm and thought about a man who just agreed to leave and then left via the fire exit instead of the front door, which meant he was either very frightened or he had somewhere specific to be with enough urgency that he didn't want to walk past Jitai to get there. He thought about the law enforcement contact. He thought about the timeline. He thought about 1 week too long and whether Haewon had believed the bluff. And with the cold-dropping clarity of someone who has just understood something he should have understood. 3 minutes earlier, Jitai realized that the restructuring he'd ordered 3 hours ago had not yet completed, because restructuring a financial architecture in 3 hours was not actually possible. And Jae-won was 61 years old and had spent 11 years being patient and careful. And a man like that does not believe a bluff without running a check first. And if Chaewon was running towards something rather than away from something, then the laptop in Jitai's hand might be exactly what it looked like. Or it might be exactly what Jitai needed to believe it was, while the real files went somewhere else entirely. And either way, the next 30 minutes were going to determine whether the conversation in room 107 had been the end of the problem, or simply the moment before the problem became. Jitai was already moving when he finished the thought. He went out the front of the building at a pace that wasn't running because running draws attention, and attention was a variable he couldn't afford right now, and he turned south toward the river with Woojin in his ear, saying, he's on foot, moving fast. He turned east on the embankment road, and Jitai cut through the gap between two buildings and came out onto the embankment path with the Han River black and cold on his left, and the city lights doing their indifferent thing on the far bank. He saw Chaewon. The old man was moving faster than his age suggested he could. Not running, but a driven walk. The walk of someone with a destination and a timeline, coat pulled tight, one hand in his pocket. He hadn't looked back yet. Jitai closed the distance without closing it all the way. He kept 30 meters between them and matched the pace and watched where Chaewon was going and called Woojin. He has a secondary device, Jitai said. Something I didn't know about. Find me every contact point within walking distance of his current location. Hotels, parking structures, convenience store lockers, anywhere you'd leave a dead drop. Woojin said, give me 4 minutes. Jitai followed Chaewon along the embankment and felt the cold come off the river in waves and thought with the part of his mind that stayed operational regardless of what the rest of it was doing, the laptop under his arm. If the laptop was bait, if Chaewon had handed it over too easily, if the real data was already elsewhere, then the conversation in room 1107 had been a performance. And the performance had been good enough that Jitai had almost believed it, which meant Chaewon was better than Jitai had given him credit for, which was information. He watched the old man's right hand still in his pocket. His phone buzzed. Woojin, there's a 24-hour convenience store 200 meters east of your position. Chaewon rented a locker there 6 weeks ago, paid cash. I found the rental record in the store's management system. Jitai looked at Chaewon's back, looked at the embankment ahead. He moved. He came up fast from behind, and Chaewon heard him at the last second and started to turn, and Jitai had his arm and was walking him firmly, efficiently, to the railing at the river's edge before Chaewon completed the turn. Not violent, decisive. The railing pressed into Jaewon's back, and Jitai stood in front of him and said quietly, "The convenience store on Yoido Row." Chaewon's face in the embankment light was the face of a man who has just had the specific experience of thinking he was 3 moves ahead and discovering he was 1 move behind. He said nothing. Jitai said, "The locker. What's in it?" Chaewon said, "You're guessing." "I'm not guessing. Woojin is very good at his work." Jitai looked at him. "What's in the locker?" A long beat. The river moved below them, dark and unconcerned. Chaewon said, "A drive, encrypted backup, everything that's on the laptop and more. More. Communications, between me and the law enforcement contact, with timestamps." Chaewon's voice was steady in the way of someone who has accepted a specific outcome and is now operating past the point where emotion is useful. "If I don't retrieve that drive before 11 p.m., it transfers automatically to a remote server." Jitai looked at his watch, 10:38, 22 minutes. He said, "Dead man's switch." "Yes." "Who set it up?" "Someone I hired in Tokyo. I don't know his name. I paid for the setup and the trigger is automated. There's no one to call." Chaewon looked at Jitai with the flat honesty of a man who has run out of performance. If the drive isn't physically retrieved, and the switch isn't deactivated in the next 20 minutes, the transfer happens regardless of what either of us does standing here. Jitai calculated. He said, "What deactivates the switch?" "A code, entered into a specific application on the secondary device." Chaewon's hand was still in his coat pocket. Jitai looked at the pocket. Chaewon said, "Yes, it's in my pocket. A phone." "Take it out slowly." Chaewon took out the phone slowly. It was a cheap prepaid device, the kind you buy at a convenience store and use until it's empty, and it was open on an application that was a simple gray interface with a text field and a countdown timer. 10:36 remaining. Jitai took the phone. He looked at the application and the countdown and said, "Code." Chaewon said, "If I give you the code, I have nothing." "You have tonight," Jitai said, "and tomorrow, which is more than the alternative." Chaewon looked at him. Something moved through his face. Not fear exactly. Something older and more tired, the expression of a man arriving at the end of a very long road and finding it ends in the ordinary dark like all the other roads. He said, "You'll let me go. You'll leave Seoul tonight." "That's not what I asked." Jitai said, "Yes, I'll let you go." Chaewon said, 847 Bravo 19 Delta. Jitai typed it in. The countdown stopped at 9:51. The application showed a single word, deactivated. Jitai breathed. He pocketed the prepaid phone and looked at Chaewon. He said, "The locker key." Chaewon reached into his other pocket and produced a small key on a plain ring. Jitai took it. He said, "Go back to the apartment, pack what you need, leave before 2 a.m. He looked at Chaewon with the complete attention that had nowhere left to go now that the immediate crisis had a shape. "I meant what I said about the next conversation." Chaewon straightened his coat. He said, "You know, I spent 11 years thinking you were your operation, the structure, the money, the power." He looked at Jitai with something that wasn't admiration and wasn't contempt, something more objective than either. "You're not your operation." Jitai said, "Neither were you in the end." Chaewon walked away along the embankment back the way he'd come, and Jitai watched him go until the distance made him indistinct, and then he turned and walked east toward the convenience store with 9 minutes and 51 seconds still on the deactivated clock and the cold coming off the river and his own heartbeat beginning, slowly, to recalibrate. The drive was in locker 14, small, matte black, in a plain case that weighed almost nothing. Jitai stood in the convenience store between the instant noodle rack and the freezer section under fluorescent lighting that had no interest in atmosphere and looked at it in his hand for a moment before putting it in his jacket pocket. He called Woo Jin. "I need you at the residence in 1 hour. Bring everything you need to wipe and verify 2 storage devices." "Yes, boss." "And Woo Jin, good work tonight." A pause. Woo Jin didn't get told good work very often. He said, "Thank you, boss." And the surprise in it was real. Jitai walked out of the convenience store into the night air and stood on the street and allowed himself 30 seconds of nothing. 30 seconds where he was not calculating or managing or deciding. He was just a man standing on a street in Yoido at 10:45 p.m., holding a small drive that contained a significant portion of his professional liability and feeling the adrenaline of the last hour beginning to metabolize into the particular exhaustion that comes after. Then his phone rang and the 30 seconds ended. It was a number he didn't recognize. Not unusual. Unknown numbers were part of the operational reality. He answered. A voice said, "Kang Jitai, this is Park Sung-min." Jitai started walking back toward his car. "I said 6 weeks." "I know what you said." Sung-min's voice was different from the first call, less performed, more direct, and underneath the directness something that sounded like strain. "Something's happened. I'm listening." "Lee Jae-won, you know who he is?" Jitai said nothing. "He approached me 8 weeks ago, gave me intelligence on your Mapogu operation, your Tuesday schedule, your Western District structure. I used it." A pause. "I'm telling you this because I've just been informed that Jae-won also gave the same intelligence, plus your financial records, to a law enforcement contact. And my organization is in those records too. Not as prominently as yours, but enough." Jitai stopped walking. He stood on the street and processed this. Jae-won had not just been building a case against Jitai's organization. He'd been building a case against everyone he'd connected over the past 8 weeks. The Busan faction's involvement in the Mapogu operation was documented. Sung-min's acceptance of the intelligence and the subsequent hit on Jitai's collection point, that was in the record too. Jae-won had been constructing a demolition that would take down multiple structures at once. Jitai said, "The law enforcement contact, who is it?" "A prosecutor, Financial Crimes Division. His name is—" "Don't say names on this line." Jitai started walking again, faster. "How did you find out?" "Jae-won has someone else, someone inside his own setup who decided the risk wasn't worth it." A sharp exhale. "I got the call 40 minutes ago. I've been trying to find you since." Jitai said, "The transfer, the automated server transfer." "What transfer?" Jae-won had a dead man switch on his primary dataset. Automated transfer to a remote server at 11 p.m., if not deactivated. Jitai checked his watch. 10:52. "I deactivated it 19 minutes ago." Silence. Sung-min said, "You already knew." "I found out tonight." Another silence, longer. Then, "So the transfer didn't happen?" "No." "And the files are with me." Sung-min breathed. The relief in it was audible and unguarded, which told Jitai more about the man's current state than anything he could have said. He said, "I owe you." "Yes," Jitai said, "you do." "The 6 weeks is now 2. You called Daeho in 2 weeks, and we have the conversation we should have had before you decided to make a statement in Mapogu." Jitai said it without heat, as a structural fact rather than an accusation. "Bring something worth trading. Don't bring nerve." He ended the call. He reached his car and got in and sat in the driver's seat and looked at the street ahead of him and felt the full weight of the night settle onto him like a physical thing. Jae-won, Daeho, Sung-man, the financial architecture, the dead man's switch, the 22-minute window, the 9 years of a man he'd trusted, and the 11 years of a man he'd underestimated, and the 8 weeks that had built up around his organization like water finding the cracks in a foundation. He started the car. He called Daeho from the road. Daeho picked up immediately. "Well?" "Jae-won is leaving tonight. The files are with me. Woojin will handle the devices." Jitai drove with the city moving past the windows, ordinary and enormous. The law enforcement contact is a financial crimes prosecutor. Jae-won was building a cross-organizational case. It would have included Sung-min's faction as well. Daeho was quiet for a moment. How far along was it? Far enough that if the transfer had completed tonight, we'd be looking at a different kind of problem in 6 weeks. Jitai paused. "We got there first. By 22 minutes. "Yes," Daeho said. "Jitai." His voice had something in it that Jitai had heard very rarely in 9 years. Not on the phone," Jitai said. "When I get there." The conversation at the residence was not like the earlier conversation. Woojin arrived 20 minutes after Jitai, and took the laptop and the drive to the secondary room and set up his equipment, and Jitai sat across from Dae-ho at the same table where he'd put down the communication analysis report. And this time, neither of them had a document between them. Dae-ho said, "What happens now?" Jitai said, "With Jae-won, it's finished. With Sung-min, we meet in 2 weeks and negotiate." He looked at Dae-ho. "With you, I don't know yet." "That's honest." "I'm always honest with you. That was the arrangement." Jitai said it without accusation. "You weren't honest with me for 8 weeks." Dae-ho didn't argue. He said, "The Busan incident. From 11 years ago. Are you going to ask me about the details?" "I already know the details. Woojin found the records while you were on your way here." Dae-ho closed his eyes briefly. And it was 11 years ago, and it was a different version of a different situation, and if I'd known then, I would have handled it then. Jitai looked at him directly. "What I couldn't have handled is 8 weeks of you making choices without telling me while men in my organization were being put in surgery." "I know. Young-ho is going to have limited mobility in his left arm for the rest of his life," Jitai said. "That's what the doctor said this morning. Limited mobility. He's 27. Dae-ho said nothing. He looked at the table. Jitai said, "I need to know if you can still do this job." Dae-ho looked up. "Not whether you want to, whether you can. Because the job requires that when something gets to you, when someone finds the thing that makes you afraid enough to act outside the structure, you bring it to me instead of managing it yourself." Jitai held his gaze. "Jae-won found the thing that makes you afraid. Next time it'll be someone else and a different thing. I need to know what you do." Dae-ho was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I bring it to you." "Say it like you mean it." "I bring it to you." And this time the weight in it was different. Not performed, not managed. Something that came from further back than presentation. Jitai nodded. He said, "You're going to spend the next month doing every piece of work that nobody else wants to do. Logistics reviews, financial reconciliations, the Inchin supplier renegotiation that everyone has been avoiding for 6 weeks. All of it." Dae-ho said, "Yes. And you're going to tell me when someone approaches you, before you decide anything, before you calculate. You pick up the phone and you say, 'Someone is pushing on me,' and I deal with it." "Yes, boss." Jitai stood up. "Go home. Get some sleep. Be back at 8 a.m. Dae-ho stood. He looked at Jitai. A long, direct look that carried 9 years, and this night and the particular weight of having been seen completely, the good and the broken parts together, and said, "Thank you." Jitai said, "Don't thank me. Fix it." Woojin finished at 1:30 a.m. and confirmed that both devices had been wiped and verified clean, and that the remote server Jae-won had set up was inaccessible, and would remain so because Woojin had spent 40 minutes ensuring it would remain so, and he left with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done good work and knows it and doesn't need it acknowledged beyond the fact of its completion. Jitai was alone in the residence at 1:47 a.m. He poured the whiskey he'd poured and not finished 3 nights ago, a different glass but the same bottle, and stood at the window and looked at Seoul. The city was doing what cities do at 1:47 a.m. Not sleeping, exactly, more like breathing at a different frequency, the frequency that belongs to the part of the night that has no argument with itself. He looked at his phone. He did not text Zuri at 1:47 a.m. He was clear about this. He looked at the city for a while and thought about what the last 72 hours had actually been, stripped of the operational detail. A test of what happened when everything that should have been secured wasn't, and what happened when you had to rebuild the security in real time while the breach was still active. He'd done it. The organization was intact. The exposure was sealed. The people who needed to understand the consequences understood them. He thought about Thursday. He thought about a goosey soup, which he'd never eaten, and about a woman who had looked at a pistol charm on his bracelet and called it bold without any of the calculations that everyone else ran, without the weight of what the bracelet meant and who wore it and what you owed the air around him when you stood in it. He thought about Dae-ho's face when Jitai had said, "I don't know yet," and about Jae-won saying, "You're not your operation," and about the fact that 2 of the people who'd looked at him most clearly tonight had both arrived at the same observation from opposite positions, that there was a gap between what he ran and what he was, and that the gap was becoming visible in ways it hadn't been before. He knew why. He knew exactly why, and the knowing sat in his chest with the specific weight of something true that hasn't been spoken yet. Something that is still deciding whether it's ready to be real. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Zuri. Okay, I know it's almost 2 a.m., and I know you said you'd explain in person, but I can't sleep, and I made too much food, and I'm going to ask you something, and you can ignore it if you want. He stared at the message. She sent another. Are you actually okay? Not like professionally okay. Actually okay. Jitai looked at the message for a long time. He was 34 years old, and he ran an organization that moved millions through structures that didn't exist on paper, and he had spent the last 72 hours managing a breach that should have destroyed everything he'd built, and had not. And he was standing at a window in the residence at 1:47 a.m., and a woman who reorganized her bookshelves by color when she was stressed was asking him if he was actually okay. He typed, no. He stared at the word, at the radical simplicity of it, at what it cost exactly nothing to type, and what it would cost considerably more to mean. He sent it. 3 dots appeared immediately. Zuri. Okay? Do you want to talk or do you want to sit with it? He typed, sit with it. Okay, she sent back. And then, after 10 seconds, I'm sitting with it too then. You're not alone in it. Jitai stood at the window of the residence with his phone in his hand, and Sol laid out below him in a whiskey glass he still hadn't touched, and felt something move through the careful architecture of a man who has spent years building rooms with very specific doors and very controlled access, something that moved through it not like a breach but like weather, so not destroying the structure but changing what the structure felt like from the inside. He stood there for a long time. At 2:14 a.m., Zuri sent, still there? He typed, yes, good, she sent, and then, Thursday. I'll make the soup again. You can tell me as much or as little as you want. He said, I'll tell you more than I plan to. A pause. Then, I know. I've known that was coming for a while. Jitai looked at that message. He looked at the city. He thought about the 30-meter distance he'd kept on the embankment and how he'd closed it when the moment required it, and about how some distances exist for structural reasons and some exist because you haven't yet decided to close them, and about how the difference between those two kinds of distance is everything. He put down the phone. He picked up the whiskey and drank it and set the glass down and turned away from the window and went to bed. And for the first time in 72 hours, he slept without anything in him still running calculations, which was either the most dangerous thing he'd allowed himself in years or something he didn't have a word for yet, but that sat in him quietly, without apology, waiting for Thursday came the way Thursdays do after weeks that have taken too much out of the ground. Quietly, without ceremony. Just another day deciding to exist. Jitai arrived at Zuri's apartment at 7 p.m. with nothing in his hands, which was unusual for him. He was a man who moved through the world with purpose attached to every gesture, who didn't enter spaces empty-handed because empty hands felt like a statement he wasn't ready to make. But he'd stood in the lobby of her building for a moment and looked at the elevator and decided that what this evening needed was for him to arrive as exactly what he was, without the buffer of wine or flowers or anything that gave him something to do with his hands besides be there. She opened the door and looked at him. He looked back. She stepped aside and he came in, and the apartment was the same as he remembered. The small orange rug, the books on every surface, the corkboard with photographs, the plants on the window ledge that were in slightly different states of health than the last time, one of them newly repotted with the fresh soil still dark around its base. The kitchen was active. The smell was something deep and rich and complex that he didn't have a reference for but that his body responded to before his mind could categorize it. She went back to the stove without making it a thing. He took off his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door where he'd noticed a spare hook the second time he'd been here, the hook that didn't have anything on it, and sat down on the counter stool. She said, "Egusi soup, you eat it with fufu or rice. I made both because I didn't know what you'd prefer, and I was stress cooking anyway, so the fufu happened." He said, "What were you stressed about?" She stirred something in the pot and didn't look at him. "You." He was quiet. She said, "Not in a bad way. I had information I didn't know what to do with, and when that happens, I cook." She glanced at him sideways. "The information was that something was happening with you that you weren't telling me about, and I was deciding how much that was my business." Jitai said, "It's your business." She put the spoon down on the rest and turned to look at him properly. She had the direct look he'd first seen on the train, the one that didn't perform anything, just looked clearly and without flinching and waited. He said, "There was a problem inside the organization. Someone I trusted for 9 years made a choice that created an exposure. There was also someone from before the current structure, who had been building a case against the organization for 11 years and almost succeeded in the last week." She listened. "It's resolved. The exposure is sealed. The people involved understand the consequences." He looked at his hands on the counter. "One of the consequences is that a man I've worked beside for 9 years is going to spend a long time rebuilding something between us that I don't know if it rebuilds." Zuri said, "Is he still there? Working with you?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her. "Because 9 years is 9 years. And because the reason he made the choice he made was that someone found the thing he was most afraid of losing and used it against him. That's not loyalty failing. That's a human being in an impossible position making a wrong decision." He paused. "I've made wrong decisions in impossible positions. I don't get to be clean about it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's either very wise or very complicated." "It's both." She almost smiled. She turned back to the stove. "The other person, the 11 years, gone. It's finished." "You sure?" "Yes." She nodded, once, accepting it. She said, "And you, how are you?" He said, "I told you I was going to tell you more than I planned to." "I remember." "I need a minute to figure out how." "Take it," she said simply, and went back to cooking, and gave him the minute without making it feel like a test or a wait, just the ordinary space of two people existing in a kitchen while one of them finds words for something that doesn't come in pre-existing language. He said, "There's a property in Mapogu, a residential building. It's held through a corporate structure connected to the organization. The third layer of that structure connects to financial records that were part of the exposure." He watched her back as he said this. "Your building is managed by a company connected to that structure." She stopped stirring. He said, "You rented your apartment 3 years before I knew you existed. It was coincidence. The connection was structural and indirect, and I didn't know about it until the night the exposure became clear." He kept his voice even. "I had the restructuring started immediately. Your building has been moved into a completely separate clean structure with no connection to anything operational. It was completed 2 days ago." He paused. "You were never in danger. The connection was financial, not physical, but you should know it existed." Zuri was very still at the stove. Jitai said, "I'm telling you because you said you don't function well when you're pretending not to know things, and because I'm not going to be the thing you don't know about." She turned around slowly. Her face was doing the processing thing, the same thing she'd done on the train when she'd woken on his shoulder and was rapidly recalibrating, except this was bigger than that, and she knew it was bigger than that, and she was doing it anyway with her eyes open. She said, "So I've been living in a building you own, that the organization owns, indirectly. Is there a difference?" He said, "Legally, structurally, yes. In terms of what it means for us. That's what I'm telling you and letting you decide." She looked at him for a long time. The soup was still on the stove and she wasn't tending it, and she didn't seem to care. She said, "Did you know when we met?" "No. I found out the same night I found out about the exposure, 6 weeks into knowing you. And you moved the asset immediately." "Yes." "Why?" He said, "Because the idea that something I built could become a threat to you without you knowing about it was..." He stopped, started again. "Because there are things I'm responsible for that I accept. And then there are things I'm not willing to have touch you. Those are different categories." Zuri looked at him. She said, "You separated them." "I tried to." "For me?" He said, "Yes." She turned back to the stove. She stirred the soup for a moment, and he watched her shoulders, and he couldn't read what was happening in them except that she was thinking, and she was doing it with her whole body the way she did everything. She said, without turning, "I'm angry." "Okay?" "I'm angry that the coincidence existed. I'm angry that I didn't know about it. I'm angry that there's a version of this where I never would have known, and I was living inside a situation I hadn't consented to." "I know. I'm also..." She stopped. "I'm also aware that you told me as soon as it was resolved and safe to tell me, that you didn't manage it and bury it, that you sat down and said, 'Here is the thing you should know,' before I asked." He said, "I almost didn't." She looked at him over her shoulder. What stopped you from not telling me? He said, You did. The version of you that said you don't function well pretending not to know things. I didn't want to be someone who decided for you what you got to know about your own life. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the stove. She said, Sit down. Dinner's in 10 minutes. He was already sitting on the counter stool. He said, I am sitting. Then stay sitting, she said. And there was something in her voice that wasn't fully resolved, but wasn't closed either. Something in the middle of working itself out that she was giving room to work. They ate at the small table. The agusi soup was the kind of food that requires your full attention, layered and deep, with a heat that builds slowly in the back of the throat. The fufu dense and functional beside it in the way of food that was built for sustenance before it was built for anything else. Jitai ate it in the focused way he ate everything that turned out to deserve focus. He said after a while, This is better than the jollof rice. She looked up. Don't ever say that to anyone else. There are strong opinions about the ranking. I'm saying it to you. I know. She looked at her bowl. That's why you can say it. They ate in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. The quiet of two people who have said the significant things and are letting them settle, giving them the space that significant things need before they become something you can live with. Zuri said, The man, the 9 years, what's his name? Dai Ho. Are you going to be able to trust him again? Jitai considered this honestly. Not the same way. The same way doesn't exist anymore. He looked at the table. But maybe a different way that accounts for what I know now. A more accurate way. Is that enough? I don't know yet. I'm going to find out. She nodded. She said, And the other one? The 11 years. K1. You let him go. It wasn't a question. He told her enough that she'd arrived at the shape of it on her own. He said, Yes. Why? Because destroying him completely didn't change what had already happened. It only added a weight I'd be carrying after. He looked at her. And because there's a version of a person who spent 11 years on something and failed that I understood, even if I didn't agree with any of his choices. 11 years is a long time to be certain about something. Zuri was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're strange about mercy. How? You're not sentimental about it. You're not generous. You're strategic about it. You give it when it costs less than the alternative. He said, Is that wrong? She thought about it. No, I think it's honest. Most people pretend mercy is pure. You just don't pretend. She picked up her water glass. I actually think that's more respectful. To the people you give it to, it's real instead of performed. Jitai said, You do that. Find the thing that looks like a flaw and turn it over. I'm a cybersecurity engineer. I look for the actual function of a thing, not the label it was given. She met his eyes. The label on you is dangerous. The function is more complicated. He said, The function includes dangerous. I know. She said it plainly, without drama. I've always known. I told you that at the street food stand. She looked at him steadily. I'm still here. Jitai looked at her across the small table in the small apartment in Mapugu. With the orange rug on the floor and the plants on the window ledge and the remains of a meal neither of them had rushed and felt the weight of the last several weeks. All of it, the breach and the betrayal and the Yahuito embankment and the dead man's switch and the 1:47 a.m. texts and the 30 seconds of nothing outside the convenience store settle through him and arrive somewhere that wasn't resolution exactly, but was the thing just before it. He said, I learned 3 Yoruba phrases last week. She blinked. What? I've been learning, slowly. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure if it was... He paused. I wasn't sure of the right moment. She said carefully, What 3 phrases? He said them. His pronunciation was careful and deliberate, the way he did everything. He'd spent time on it, more than he would admit, working the sounds until they felt like they meant something rather than like imitation. The first phrase was a greeting. The second was, I hear you. Not I understand, but specifically I hear you, which he'd researched specifically because it was different. The third was her family name, the deeply personal one, the one she'd told him about, the name reserved for those closest, the one she'd said she'd never given anyone in Seoul. He'd learned it so he'd know how to say it if the moment ever came to ask. He said it now, correctly, with the particular emphasis on the second syllable that made it hers and not anyone else's. Zuri went very still. She said, "How did you know how to say it?" "I asked someone, a Yoruba language tutor, online. I described the structure and she helped me with the pronunciation." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking to use it. I learned it so that if the moment was right, I'd be able to say it correctly, not approximated." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said softly, in Yoruba, something he didn't know. And he said, "I don't know that one yet." She said, "It means you already earned it." She looked at her hands on the table, then back at him. "You can use it." Jitai said her name. Her real name, the full weight of it, with the pronunciation that treated it like what it was. Not a word, but a specific thing that belonged to a specific person who had sat beside a frightening man on a subway because her feet hurt and had not been afraid once, not in 11 weeks, not through street food stands in Korean barbecue restaurants and soup kitchens and 1:47 a.m. texts, and was not afraid now. She reached across the small table and put her hand over his, and didn't say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said that hadn't already been, and sometimes the right move is to know when the words are finished and let the rest be what it is. They sat like that for a while. Later they did the dishes the way they'd fallen into it without discussing it. She washed, he dried, because she knew where things went and he didn't, and he'd been handed the dish towel the first time he'd stayed long enough for dishes and had taken it without comment and taken it every time since. The kitchen was small and they moved around each other in it with the practiced accommodation of people who have spent enough time in a shared space to know each other's rhythms. She said, while washing a bowl, "What happens now with the organization?" He dried a cup. "The Busan situation resolves in 2 weeks. Sungmin comes to the table instead of making statements. We negotiate the Western District boundary properly." He set the cup down. "The financial architecture is rebuilt cleaner. Woojin oversees the restructuring. And Daeho does the work nobody wants to do for 30 days, and we find out what rebuilding looks like from that. And the old man, Haewon. Done." He said it with the finality that meant it was a door that was closed. He got what he wanted. He walked away. What he built for 11 years didn't work, and he knows that. And men like that don't invest another 11 years in something that already failed. She rinsed the last bowl and handed it to him, and dried her hands on the kitchen towel hanging from the oven handle. She leaned back against the counter and looked at him. She said, "And us? What happens with us?" He set the bowl down carefully. He said, "I've been thinking about that since the subway." "I know. So have I." She looked at him with the full, clear look that had never once flinched. "I need you to understand something. I'm not afraid of your world. I'm not naive about it either. I know what it is, and I know what you are inside it, and I've had 11 weeks to decide whether I could sit with that knowledge." He said, and I can." She said it simply. "What I can't sit with is a version of this where I'm managed, where you decide what I know and when I know it because you think you're protecting me. You did the right thing tonight telling me about the building, but it can't be the exception. It has to be how it works." Jitai said, "It will be." "I mean it." "I know you mean it." He looked at her. "And I mean it too, which is different from saying it because you need to hear it." She held his gaze, searched it. Whatever she found there, she held it for a moment and then nodded once. Not capitulation, not softness, but the specific nod of someone who has run a check on a system and found it functional. She said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She pushed off from the counter and walked past him toward the living room and then stopped and looked back, one hand on the doorframe. She said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" "On the subway. That night. I sat next to you because my feet hurt." She looked at him with the slight disbelief of someone re-examining a memory that keeps not making sense. "Not because of anything else. My feet just hurt and there were 3 empty seats and I wasn't paying enough attention to know I was supposed to be afraid." Jitai said, "I know. Does that bother you, that it was accidental?" He thought about it. He said, "Everything I've built was because I knew what was coming. I planned for it. I controlled the variables." He looked at her. "You're the first thing in years that happened without me planning for it. The first variable I didn't control." He paused. "No, it doesn't bother me. It's the only part I wouldn't change." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Come sit with me." and went into the living room, and he followed her the way you follow something that was moving in the right direction before you knew you were looking for a direction. So, they sat on the small couch with the city outside the window doing its late Thursday things, and she put her feet up on the coffee table and he sat with his elbows on his knees, and they talked, not about organizations or exposures or men who wait 11 years or the cost of trust. They talked about her conference presentation on network penetration testing and what she'd meant by the third argument that she'd thought landed but wasn't sure, and about the tutoring academy on the second floor of Wu Jin's building that Jitai had never paid attention to, and about a memory she had of the first time she'd made a goosey soup away from her mother's kitchen and gotten it wrong in 4 separate ways, and about the specific loneliness of being good at your work in a city that isn't yours, and not knowing for a long time whether the good at your work part or the city that isn't yours part was louder. He said, "Which is louder now?" She considered. "Neither. They figured out how to be quiet at the same time." She looked at him sideways. "Relatively recently." He said nothing, because nothing was the right response. Not modest, not performing, just accepting that she'd said something that landed exactly where it was meant to land, and he didn't need to qualify it. Outside, Seoul moved at the frequency it moves at on late Thursday evenings. Not asleep, not loud, the middle register of a city that is always doing something but doesn't always need to announce it. The window had the slight fog at the edges that cold nights put on glass, and the light inside the apartment was the warm, low light of lamps rather than overheads. And it was the kind of quiet that exists between people who have gotten through something together without knowing they were getting through something together. Zuri said eventually, "I'm going to need you to teach me how to say your full name correctly, the formal version. I've been saying it wrong slightly." He said, "You've been saying it fine." "I've been saying it fine to you. I want to say it correctly." He said it for her, the full formal name, with the particular weight that Korean names carry when said completely. The weight of lineage and context, and the specific expectation that comes with being someone's child and someone's inheritor, and then eventually your own person inside those two things. She repeated it, got the middle syllable slightly wrong. He said, "Almost. The vowel is, show me." He said it again, slower. She repeated it. Got it right this time. He said yes. She said, "Good." And then, with the directness that was simply how she was made, "I'm going to be saying it a lot. I wanted to say it right." Jitai looked at the window, at the foggy edges and the city beyond it, and the particular Thursday evening quality of a life that had, in 11 weeks and 1 terrible week and 1 night of honest conversation, become something he didn't have a map for and had stopped looking for the map. He said, "My men noticed, before this week, before any of this." He looked at his hands. "Daeho told me in the first weeks that I sounded different. My subordinates noticed I laughed more. That I was..." He stopped. She said, "Human." He said, "I was going to say present, but that's probably the same thing." She said, "It usually is." He looked at her. "You did that. I want you to know that I know it was you." She looked back at him with the clear eyes that had never once performed anything in front of him, and she said, "You were already there. I just sat next to you." Todd. She fell asleep on the couch somewhere after midnight. Not the startled unconsciousness of the subway, but the slow, deliberate surrender of someone who has been carrying things and has decided in this specific place to put them down. Her head rested against the couch cushion, and her feet were still on the coffee table, and her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm that means someone is gone somewhere restful. Jitai sat beside her and did not move for a while. He looked at her sleeping face with the same attention he brought to everything, but different. The way everything he did in her presence was the same and different, the same mechanics of a man who pays attention, working on something that the attention had never had occasion to work on before. He looked at the apartment, the small orange rug, the corkboard with photographs, one of which, he'd noticed this 3 weeks ago, was a photograph of the street food stand near Hongik University, taken from a low angle, the halogen lamp a warm blur at the top. He didn't know when she'd taken it. He didn't know if she'd taken it because of the fish cake or because of something else. He thought about Kim Seung-jae, who was recovering in a private room and would see his wife and children this weekend for the first time since Mapogu. About Jung-ho, who would have limited mobility in his left arm and who had been 27 years old and had gotten into a car on a Tuesday for a schedule change that someone had sold to the wrong people. About Soo Hyun and his sister, resettled somewhere Jitai didn't need to know precisely, building something else. About Dai Ho, who would be at the office at 8 a.m. tomorrow doing the work nobody wanted to do, and would keep doing it, and through the doing of it would become something he hadn't been before. Not lesser, not greater, but more accurate. He thought about Chae Wan on the embankment, walking away in the cold, 11 years of patience, arriving at a man who'd gotten there first by 22 minutes, and a piece of timing that was luck and preparation in equal measure. He thought about Sung-min, young and capable and instructed to wait, and what 2 weeks of genuine wait would do to a man who had learned that noise and nerve were not the same as power. He looked at Zuri, sleeping. He thought about a woman who had sat beside the most feared man on a crowded subway because her feet hurt, and had woken up on his shoulder and laughed at herself before she was afraid, and had eaten fish cake on plastic stools and asked him hard questions with the patient directness of someone who believes that the hard questions are actually the respectful ones, and had made jollof rice and a goosey soup and reorganized her bookshelves by color when she was stressed, and had sent, "Are you actually okay?" at 1:47 a.m., and then sent, "I'm sitting with it too then," without asking for anything in return. He thought about what she'd said on the couch. "You were already there. I just sat next to you." He sat with that for a while. Let it be what it was. Then he got up carefully, without waking her, and went to the small kitchen and found the extra blanket that he'd seen in the cabinet beside the refrigerator the second time he'd been here. The blanket that existed with the practicality of someone who sometimes falls asleep somewhere other than her bedroom and is prepared for this. And he came back and laid it over her with the precise care of a man doing something he doesn't want to get wrong. He picked up his jacket from the hook, put it on. He looked at her once more. At the blanket and the orange rug, and the foggy-edged window, and the corkboard photograph of the street food stand. He let himself out quietly, pulling the door until he heard the soft click of the latch. He stood in the hallway of the apartment building in Mapogu for a moment and breathed. Then he walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood in it going down, and stepped out into the lobby and out through the front door into the cold, clear air of a Seoul Thursday, becoming Friday. And he stood on the street for a moment with the city doing its middle-of-the-night things around him. The distant traffic, the lit window 3 floors up in the building across the street, the convenience store down the block with its eternal fluorescent certainty. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. "Zuri, you left. I woke up under a blanket, which means you found the cabinet." He smiled. Not the quiet, almost smile. Not the controlled expression that people cataloged and reported back to each other as evidence of something unprecedented. A real one. Small and private, standing alone on a street at midnight. He typed, "Get some sleep." She sent back, "Already was. Go home safe." He looked at the message. He typed, "I will." And then, because he had learned her name and how to say it, and what it meant to be given the use of it, and because she had said you were already there and meant it, and because a small decision made on aching feet on a crowded Friday subway had turned out to be the most consequential thing that had happened to either of them in years, he typed one more thing before pocketing the phone and starting toward his car. He typed it in Yoruba. She read it, and whatever she did next in the warm lamplight of the small apartment in Mapogu, he was already walking, and the city was cold and clear and enormous around him, and for the first time in longer than he could precisely calculate, the enormous cold clarity of it felt like something other than weight. It felt like room.